Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. Believe me, there's people that need to work for the government 40 hours a week, 30 days vacation, and retirement in 30 years, and that's great. It's not for me. I like being an entrepreneur. I like the freedom. Elon Musk employs thousands and thousands of people. Walmart employs what? Over 100,000 people in the U.S.? Okay, Sam Walton got very, very, very wealthy off it, but they did it by enriching their employees, providing jobs, taking risk. You don't make wealth, it doesn't grow on trees. It's transactional. You're providing value. That's why people will pay you. The whole thing against capitalism is a lack of knowledge and education of economics.
Welcome to the show, Charles Reed. It's great to have you on. So let's dive right in. My first question is just how has your military experience translated to your now business endeavors?
Well, 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, uh, becoming an NCO, they teach leadership to NCOs, and there's books and classes and training on it. But one of the tenets of the Marine Corps is mission, men, self. So you complete the mission, whatever it takes. That's the first and the primary thing you do. Then you take care of your men. You make sure that they're as well taken care of as you can possibly do. And then only then do you take care of yourself. I remember very well I was in guerrilla warfare school in northern Okinawa. This was a long time ago. And we had a young lieutenant, and we'd been in the field for 9, 10 days, and we finally got a hot meal delivered out. And he made sure that every one of us got fed before he filled a plate for himself. Now, nobody would have objected if he'd filled his plate first, but he made sure that we all got our plates filled and had a hot meal before he took his. Now, he got his before any of us got seconds, but he took care of us first, and that was an early example in my military of watching leadership truly work effectively. And so mission men self translates into our business. Our job is to provide a perfect payroll on time every time, and that's what happens first. And we do whatever it takes to make that happen. Beyond that, I take care of my employees. I take care of my customers. The CEO's job is to make your employee's life as efficient and as happy as possible in the realm that you're in, that you can operate in. So that's my job, because they're the ones that make me money. They're the ones that make the company work. If I didn't have my employees, I'd be out of business.
Yeah, and recently I think there's this growing negativity online towards companies that try to push a certain culture of, family first. And I think that's because the companies there are doing it as a cover to actually take advantage of their employees. Where what you're describing actually puts employees first and puts people first in a genuine way, and profits are second.
Yeah, I've worked for paternal companies. My first job out of university was Texas Instruments. And Texas Instruments, TIers work, live, and play together. And that was a little too much. People tend to stay with TI forever or leave fairly quickly. I left fairly quickly because it was a top-down paternal organization, and they kind of insisted that you do these things. And that's not individuality. Every one of my people is unique and has different strengths and different weaknesses, and has to be treated uniquely. And so that's important. You just say, well, we're all going to do this together, and we're all going to do that together, and we're all going to be in. You're not my owner. Thank you very much.
Makes sense. So you have appropriate boundaries in place so that people can be their individual selves while also still being part of a team and feeling the positive benefits of doing that. So how long does Get Payroll?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. I was just agreeing with you. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So how long has Get Payroll been running?
Get Payroll will be in business in December of this year, a third of a century.
Wow. So 33 years. That's amazing.
33 and a third years.
33 and 30 years. Exact. Okay, perfect.
Oh, I'm going to go exactly. If I say a third of a century, it's going to be 33 years, 4 months to the day. That's accountants for you.
Yeah. So, what was your inspiration for starting the business in the first place? Because one of the topics I do cover here on the show is entrepreneurship. So, lots of people who watch want to start their own businesses, as do I. So, what was your inspiration, and then what was the journey like?
Well, I'd grown up in a family business, so I was used to the concept. But after university, I went to work for Texas Instruments, as I said, spent 15 years in the corporate world, large corporations, small corporations, startups, turnarounds. Wonderful experience. But in my early 40s, I realized I was never going to run a corporation for somebody else. I didn't have the political skills. I'm unwilling to stab people in the back and toss them off the ladder. So if I was going to have a corporation to run, I was going to have to start my own. So a third of a century ago, my wife and I started our own company and grew it and continue to grow it. She's passed, but we grow every week, every day, and having a great time and a lot of fun doing it. Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It's, believe me, there's people that need to work for the government, 40 hours a week and 30 days vacation and retirement in 30 years, and that's great. It's not for me. I like being an entrepreneur. I like the freedom. Now that doesn't mean you don't have to do the work, but you get to choose when you do it. So sometimes it's late nights and weekends, but you get it done. Um, Work-life balance doesn't exist in a startup for a new entrepreneur. I had that question asked at a when I was on a panel discussion one time about work-life balance, and I cracked up and laughed. And I said, for the beginning entrepreneur, there is no work-life balance. It's all work. And if you have a partner, hopefully they understand that. I was lucky my wife did, and we worked it together. But yeah, I wanted to have my own company. I wanted to be in charge, and I like that. I like the freedom of being an entrepreneur, and we've grown the company and continue to grow it. And it's been a great third of a century.
That's amazing. Yeah. Have you heard of Ray Dalio?
Of course.
The reason I ask is because I like the thing he says about his company, which is that they value radical honesty and radical transparency, I believe it is. So the idea is that all meetings are open to everyone, the recordings, anyone can view them, and people tell the truth. So there isn't that backstabbing and that sense of office politics. And he says usually it takes a year or so for people to realize whether the company's for them or not. Just like you said, at Texas Instruments, it takes time for people to realize whether it's for them or not, and they stay a long time or they leave early on. So it seems like you're a sharpshooter. You're drawn to, a company where it's not about the politics. And you discovered in corporate America, a lot of it is about, taking credit and trying to do as little as possible and avoid blame and sort of leave a path behind you as you get promoted where there's skeletons in the closet, so to speak. Uh, so when you started your company, how did you hire for people who wanted something like that? How did you eliminate the potential snakes? Not hire them in the first place, ideally.
I was very lucky. My wife was very much of a people person. And so she could ferret those people out. We don't hire jerks. I like Berkshire Hathaway's attitude. We don't hire jerks. We hire nice people. So now that Ruth's gone, I'm not as good at it. So when we hire somebody, everybody gets to interview them, and anybody can blacklist them. Anybody in the company, any employee can say, no. And that's fine, because if they don't fit the culture and they don't fit in with everybody that's here, that's successful and doing well and contributing, why would I want to? It's work to find good people. But chemistry is at least half of the decision. They have to fit. The culture comes from top down, and it's the culture I've promulgated for the company. Um, it's heavy in customer service. Profit is a secondary thing. I mean, we make money. Don't misunderstand me. But uh, I'm not there to nickel and dime and push for every dollar and every shekel that I can get from people, and to try to minimize what I pay people. We pay people and pay them well, uh, and they work for it and they're successful at it. And so, yeah, I don't mind paying them, because the the return for the company is excellent. So
Awesome. And how did COVID-19 affect your business, if it affected it at all?
we got a lot of business. There was the PPP and other things that we had to help with because it was payroll related. We lost a few clients. We learned to work from home, which solved our entire disaster recovery program because everybody in the company now can, though they don't every day, work from the house. So if the building gets hit in a tornado, well, we just work from home for a while we build a new one. Uh, so that was an interesting experience. Uh, but now everybody's set up for it, and almost everybody works from home part of the time. Being the old school I am, I have a little problem with that, but it's working, and as long as it continues to work and my employees are happy with it, okay, we'll keep working. If it doesn't work, we'll do something else. But COVID-19 was scary, but it did not affect us drastically. I mean, I didn't qualify for the programs because we didn't lose revenue.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know that COVID, in fact, even helped certain industries like digital entertainment and so on. But it really seemed to hit hardest, the restaurants and the businesses that were forced to
Yeah,
go into lockdown.
the restaurants are restaurant clients, some of them which went out of business. But Texas was not as strict on lockdown as some, and they changed a lot of the laws to allow delivery of alcoholic beverage drinks and all kinds of other things to try and help the restaurants. And there was a lot of money that flowed out for them. And it could have been worse, and it was worse in other parts of the country. Governor Abbott was very early on, along with DeSantis, and stopping lockdowns and closing of businesses and so on. So it was not as bad in Texas. Uh, our clients in other places had much more problems.
Yeah, and I think time showed that Texas's approach was better than, say, California's, or even here in Vancouver. We had extensive lockdowns, and it led to permanent damage to the economy and businesses.
Yep, I have to agree. I think that experience has shown that uh, the softer approach and the quicker to get out of it approach was proper and worked.
Makes sense.
It's nice.
Um,
It's nice to be on the right side of something for a change.
so I'd like to discuss personal finance a bit because I think a lot of people they do feel worried about the current economic state. They feel like inflation is quite high, and they'd like to set themselves up for a better future, but they're not sure how when things feel so expensive and wages feel so relatively low compared to production. So, what are the steps people can take in their individual lives to set themselves up and their families up for a more secure future?
Well, first of all, avoid debt. Debt's very expensive, and you're paying it back. But long-term debt, buying property, particularly mortgages, land, homes, businesses, uh, you're going to pay for it with dollars that are worth a lot less because of inflation. So the value of the asset goes up, but the intrinsic cost will go down. Because if you're paying $1 of mortgage with a 50-cent dollar 2 years from now, that's taking advantage of inflation. So that's one of the things you can do is assets that will appreciate. If you're truly worried, gold, jewelry, other things that tend to hold their value, I don't recommend them as investments, but they are hedges against inflation. Uh, Gold is not an investment. It's a store of value and it's a hedge. So understand that there's a difference between an investment that yields a return and a hedge that protects you from an inflationary environment. I don't buy gold personally. I would much rather buy land. So they're not making any more of that. They're still mining gold. But other than that, be smart, be frugal, don't spend, save money, invest it, grow it. All those things, Robbins has radio and TV shows and books on it, and they work. Um, it's compound interest is an incredible thing. If you invest money, it grows. Invest in the market. Yeah, the market goes up and down, but long term, it generates, properly managed, generates 10% a year. And if you start young, you'll die a very rich person. I wish I had invested more when I was younger. I really do. That's my biggest regret in life. So, credit cards, pay cash, borrow when you have to, unless it's for an asset. Uh, be frugal. These are all time tested rules and tools to better yourself financially.
Yeah, that's awesome because I listen to a lot of the Dave Ramsey show, especially recently, and he
Yeah,
gets callers in who say crazy things like, "Oh, I'm 66 and I still have student debt," and I'm just like, "Wow, that's crazy," and it's because they've
yeah,
just been paying nothing but interest, and they haven't been paying the principal down, and so debt
yeah.
can get out of hand really fast, even at
That
low
can
interest.
that can easily get out of hand. It's probably happened to all of us at some point in our lives. Very frankly, I have credit cards, and the balance is paid in full every month. I
Same.
haven't carried a
Yeah.
balance in many years because the rates are just ridiculous. They're criminal. There's no reason for them except the companies do it because so many people default on credit card debt and they don't collect it. So they have to make it back some other way, and they make it back from. So the credit card companies don't like me because I don't carry a balance. They make money off the purchases from the vendors, but they don't make any money off of me.
Yeah. Um, and you mentioned compound interest. I think I heard something really insightful recently, which is this idea that I think it was from Naval Ravikant. He basically said compound interest leads to everything great in life. So you can compound money, but you can also compound your skills over time. You can compound your network of people over time. You can compound your knowledge, and so on. So really, if you just pick a field and you just start compounding in it, in 10 years, you could be really great at it.
It's 10,000 repetitions. So, yes, you can become an expert in almost anything if you have the innate skills, um, and you can become a success in the field you're choosing if you work at it. Uh, I occasionally run across people who say, "Well, I haven't read a book since I got out of college or out of high school," and I'm going, "How dull your world must be that you can't pick up insightful things and learn from them." I read all the time. I am a lifelong learner. I was in my 60s when I became a U.S. tax court practitioner to further my skill set for my clients' benefits. Uh, you never stop. Yeah, one of these days I'll die, but until then, I'm going to continue to learn and grow in my skills and knowledge and ability to excel at what I do and what I enjoy doing. Why would you not do that? It just, yeah, compound interest, compound your knowledge and growth and successes, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. It does concern me that there seems to be a growing movement against intellectualism or knowledge, where people seem to be proud that they don't read. Where for me, it's like I've read more since school, and I actually much prefer the books I've read as an adult compared to the ones I read in school.
I'm with you.
So, if you're willing to talk about it, I'd be interested to hear how you met Ruth and advice you have for young men today, because unfortunately, more and more young men are remaining single and virgins, actually, well into their 30s.
Well, yeah, well, we won't go with that point, but I'd come back from Vietnam and I was stationed in Kansas City and I was single. And as I said, I read a lot. So, about 3 blocks from the basement apartment that I rented was a 24-hour restaurant, Sydney's, there in Kansas City. It was a small chain. And I would go in and drink coffee and read. I didn't, it was the coffee was a quarter, and you tip a nickel. Okay, this was a long time ago, and so I would spend hours there and tip a nickel. So the waitresses really didn't like me on their station. But one of them got smart and she put me in a unused station where there weren't nobody was taking care of that. And she'd come by periodically and I like my coffee hot. She'd dump out my cold coffee and pour me some fresh hot coffee. So I noticed her and we talked a little bit. And then some months later, I was down having a drink at the tavern nightclub 3 doors down. And she was in, and we talked some more. And then a couple of weeks later, she was in tears. She was leaving her husband. She had 5 children. She didn't know what to do. Her parents weren't going to help her. And I said, well, bring them over to my place. And she did. So a couple of weeks later, I rented a house and we moved in there. And a few months later, we got married. Ruth was 10 years older than I was and had 5 children when I married her. I like to claim insanity, but we were married for 45 years before she passed, so I guess we did something right. And I'll be honest, my parents were a little skeptical. But at our wedding, my father was dancing with her, and he asked, if you don't mind, can I ask what your birthday is? When were you what year were you born? And she said she was born June 26, 1939. My parents were married June 11th, 1938. So she could have been their eldest daughter. And at that point, everything was okay. So it worked for us. I was very lucky. I don't have, I have little advice to give to young men on how to find a wife. I consider myself extraordinarily lucky that I found Ruth and that we grew together and married and lived for a long time together. It wasn't perfect. We had some counseling a couple of times in the middle because I'm not an easy person to live with. She was, I wasn't. But I'll give you the best piece of advice for newlywed men. The two most important words you could ever have in your marriage are yes, dear.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great story. I also hear that in successful relationships, generally both people play complementary roles. So they're actually different, but their different skill sets align well together. So how did you and Ruth play complementary roles?
And I agree with that. Ruth was the people person. I was the technical person. She was arts. We'd been married a number of years, and she'd taken found this class about carving carousel horses because she thought that was fascinating. So she went, and then she dragged me in because it was a little engineering heavy on building them. So we basically formed a partnership. I would do the engineering side and build the carcass, and then she would do all the artistic touches, all the carving and painting and so on. So I'd do the assembly, and she'd make it. It'd be wood, and then she would do all the carving and make it into a carousel horse. And that's how our marriage worked, basically, always. Is she was that creative, artsy side, and I was the engineering, mathematical side. We were at Home Depot, and there was this etagere that she liked. And she said, there's this niche at the house, and it'll be perfect for that. And I looked and I said, it won't fit. She said, it'll fit. I said, it won't fit. So we had a discussion about it. I said, here, I'll make you a deal. We'll get a tape and we'll measure it. We'll go back to the house and we'll measure it. And if it fits, I'll come back and get it. You don't have to do anything else. She said, okay. So we borrowed a tape from the clerk and measured it. Went back to the house. I got out my tape and measured it. And the etagere was 3/4 of an inch too big. Of course, she didn't speak to me for a day. So I was the technical aspect, and she was the artsy-fartsy side.
So when it came to building Get Payroll, I assume she did a lot of the, like you said, employing people, recruiting, and identifying the right kind of people. What else did she cover, and then what else did you cover together?
Well, she did a lot of the clerical work in the beginning, and I did the technical CPA work. So she did all the routine stuff, and I handled all the high-end accounting and tax work. And she, of course, did all the hiring. I mean, we did it together, but she was the final say. I only overruled her once, and I regretted it. So, every husband makes mistakes.
Lesson learned.
But
Yeah.
working together is not. See, my parents worked together. I thought it was natural to work with your wife. Well, working with your wife is an unnatural act. I promise you, because the relationship you have at home may not be the relationship you have at work. At work, when it came down to the technical side, I had to make decisions, and I said, "This is the way it has to be." That was my expertise. I'm the CPA. I'm the accountant. I know how these things have to be. Well, at home, it's her way. Happy wife, happy life. So we had to it took a year or so to rearrange that. One of the things she would do is we'd get ready for bed, and she'd have one more problem at the office she wanted to get off her chest. So she'd tell me about it, sometimes in bed. She'd roll over and go to sleep, and I'd sit there and worry about it at 2 in the morning. So we came to an agreement after a year that after dinner, no more business. Now, sometimes that led to some very late dinners, but at least I got my sleep.
Yeah, it's interesting. What do you think are some early innovations that Get Payroll made that other people in the industry didn't catch on to?
We were very early into the internet. We were the first truly green payroll. We were the first payroll service bureau to offer crypto payroll. So we've been on the edge of things as much as possible forever. We like that. I like to be cutting edge, not bleeding edge, but cutting edge on technology. So, we moved away from paychecks and into direct deposit and debit cards very early on, and pushed those before debit cards became as popular as they are now. We pushed a lot of made comments on a lot of the state laws and so on to try and encourage electronic payroll. In the beginning, it was tough in some states to do that rather than paychecks, because state legislators don't change with the time very well. They really are not up to speed on a lot of things and changes in technology. I mean, I go back far enough. I remember getting paid in cash. Well, nobody pays in cash now. Okay, and checks are we our the number of checks we write has fallen drastically over the last 15 years to, my check company called me and said, what do we need to do to get your business back? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you haven't been ordering, checks and forms and so on. And I go, no, you're still our vendor. It's just that we don't use them like we used to. And the last supply lasted, about 4 times longer than it used to. So he went, okay, well, that's both good and bad. But yeah, so our forms vendor was not happy the fact that there's so much electronic in the payroll world these days. But that's life.
Yeah, I remember a story from one person talking about his name is Alex Hormozy. He's an entrepreneur, and actually he works with his wife as well. But so he was talking about a friend of his who was doing everything right in growing his business, but the industry he was in was newspapers, and so he was like, I don't get why my business isn't growing. And Alex told him, "You're in the newspaper business. The industry is shrinking 50% year over year. Of course, you're not growing." And so it's the same thing with the checks. When he calls you, of course, checks are not going to be the industry, so they have to adapt.
And you have to look at your market and understand your market. One of my favorite stories in that is the gentleman who invented a very sophisticated machine where you could basically feed in junk cars and it would chop them up and use different fluid density beds and so on to separate the parts out. And it was a wonderful invention. And he built it, and then he built a factory to build them because it was so well received. And he went bankrupt because his worldwide market for the machine was 100. And when he sold his 100th machine, there was nobody else wanted one. So
why was it 100? Because there were only like 100.
There were only 100 people that could afford and needed that kind of machine that could do that amount of business. It's like one of these huge earth movers that, the bucket miners and so on. They build them to order. If you want one, they'll build you one, but they don't stock them because nobody buys them.
You should have gone the route of like Hewlett Packard and leased them out and then offered maintenance and service.
Something. There were other ways to approach the market. Absolutely. I play poker, And in some of the poker tables, you'll find automatic card shufflers. You can't buy one. You can lease them. You rent them. The company has the patents on it, and they haven't expired. And so if you want automatic shufflers for your poker table, your card tables, you lease them from the manufacturer at a pretty price. What it does for the card rooms is it speeds up the number of deals they can get. And if they're raking the pot, then that means they make a couple extra pots an hour, which more than pays for the rental of the card shuffler. So that company knew its market and knew how to best extract profit from it.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's smart business. It's win-win.
Absolutely. It always
So
should
yeah,
be win-win. If it's not, you can't. A win-lose transaction is never going to be repeatable. People will get tired of it and quit doing it. So anything you go into has to be win-win or win-win-win. So other than that, it's not going to succeed long-term. Nobody's going to be taken advantage of over and over. They'll get tired of it. They'll do something else.
so that kind of takes me into my next question, which is that I've noticed young people today, especially, there's a lot of sort of negative sentiment against billionaires and against wealth and capitalism in general. And my understanding of business has always been that good business is win-win. It's mutually beneficial. And so the idea is, if you are a billionaire, assuming you haven't done anything illegal, it means you've added value to society. It means that the reason you've made money is because you have made deals that have enriched other people. So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Elon Musk employs thousands and thousands of people. Walmart employs what? Over 100,000 people in the U.S.? Okay, Sam Walton got very, very, very wealthy off of it. Okay? But they did it by enriching their employees, providing jobs, taking risk. When Sam put up his first store, that was a risk. He invested. If it went broke, he was out of. It was his money that went down the tubes. I built this building. I was personally responsible for the mortgage on it. If I hadn't succeeded, made a profit, it had come out of my pocket, or I'd have had to bankrupt and they'd taken everything I own. Banks are like that. So you don't make wealth. It doesn't grow on trees. It's transactional. You're providing value. That's why people will pay you. The whole thing against capitalism is a lack of knowledge and education of economics and how things work. Socialism is a very enticing philosophy. Everybody's equal and everybody prospers, and it doesn't work. I think Margaret Thatcher said it beautifully when she said socialism is great until you run out of other people's money. Bernie Sanders touts socialism all the time, yet he owns 3 houses and is a millionaire and has never worked a job in his life. So most socialists preach this, but they don't live it. They're hypocrites. Most politicians are hypocrites too. It's young people are not educated. The educational system in this country doesn't teach them what capitalism is and why it's important and how it works and how it made us the richest country in the world and continues to. We don't have millions of people trying to cross our southern border because we're a poor country and they'll live in poverty. Okay? They want to live the American dream, and that's a capitalistic dream, and that's why they come here. If they wanted to go to some socialist hellhole, they could go to Venezuela, they could go to North Korea. I don't see crowds of people trying to get into North Korea. Do you?
No.
So,
Yeah, I think the big thing as well is that property rights are the foundation of building wealth. If you know that nobody's going to come and steal your stuff, then you can put a lot of work into building it. But if you know that at any point the government can seize it, someone can use violence to seize it, then why try? Why build it up?
and if they can, they will. If they see that you have wealth and they have the ability to steal it, they will do it. They will nationalize it. The Saudis did that to Aramco back in the 50s when Standard Oil had gone in and built up the oil fields. They stole them from them because they could. And that's what dictatorial and hierarchical governments do, is they will steal the wealth from those that produce it. And so the ownership of the means and the product of production, combined with the human desire to have a better life for yourself and for your prodigy. As long as that operates in a box of laws that are consistent, people will get wealthy. They'll make it work. And it's when the laws are inconsistent and change and are whimsical and people can steal from you that it fails. And we see that around the world all the time. And when governments do that, capital flees, capitalists flee, uh, people who want a better life flee. That's why we have millions of them on our southern border, because they're looking for a better life. And they're fleeing from countries that won't allow them to do that.
What do you think are the differences for the economy between small businesses and large businesses?
Well, there's a lot of things that go into that. That's an interesting question. Small businesses tend to be much more family oriented. They tend to be much closer. They tend to be much closer knit. They tend to be more focused. Uh, they tend to be more nimble. They can respond to changes. They tend to be on top of their market because the owners talk to their customers all the time. This came up in a discussion with my ops manager the other day. That's why many businesses, family businesses, the old shirt sleeves in three generations, because the new generation did not go through the worries and the troubles and where was the next meal going to come from and the pain of building the business that their parents did. And when they inherit the business, they don't really understand how to run it. I said that my family, my kids were going to take over the business, and they're not interested. I'd make them go work for the competition and be successful there before I'd ever let them in my business. Then big companies, they're professional managers. They don't own the company per se. They didn't build it. They don't view the world the same way that an entrepreneur does. This is not their baby. They didn't build it from scratch. They didn't, you walk in, people who run IBM today, they're not Thomas Watson building it from scratch. The last really major leader I saw was probably Jack Welch at General Electric. And when he left, GE had substantial problems because Jack saw that as his baby and his source of wealth and so on. So, the people who run major corporations didn't build them. They don't own them. Uh, they're not their baby. They're not entrepreneurs. They're managers. They're bean counters. And, I'm a bean counter. And bean counters, for the most part, are terrible at running a business because they look at the numbers. They don't look at the people.
How did you change that for yourself? How did you sort of go against the bean counter instinct and build that capability? Did you learn from Ruth, or was it some other way?
Well, I learned a lot of it from my father and in his business. And then Ruth, being the people person she was, really taught me a lot about people and relationships and so on. So I'm not your typical CPA. Believe me, I go to conferences with them. When I was younger, even then, 8:30 at night, they're all in bed. That wasn't my life. They're most CPAs would be perfectly happy with an office with an outside entrance and two slots in the wall, one for work to come in and one for work to go out, and never see anybody and not even have a phone. That makes most CPAs very happy. I like people better than that. I like relationships. I like my clients. I like my employees. I like that interface. That makes me non-typical as a CPA. And there's a lot of us, but there's most CPAs, most bean counters are not people.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. It's a good thing that and people like you exist, because I think you connect the two worlds in a way that leads to, well, good companies, right? Like Get Payroll probably succeeds because you have your foot in both worlds. You can provide the excellent technical advice, and you can also understand people problems and be empathetic with them.
I agree.
So you mentioned this idea of ownership and small business and a sense of investment. So if an employee came up to you and said, I'd like to earn part of my salary as equity in Get Payroll, how would you respond?
We're in the process right now because when I retire or die, The business is going to the employees. So we're right now in succession planning of how that's going to work because they're going to own it. They helped build it. They should have the opportunity to own it. That's my feeling.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that is basically the best incentive that can align, values between employees and companies. It's just ownership of some form.
I agree. I think that's very valuable. And I've said this, that this is going to happen and is happening on multiple podcasts. So it's not that I can back away from now. Public record. Yeah. Michael's over here, my technical guy, and he's listening to me right now.
Uh, do you have any stories you'd like to share from your time in the Marine Corps that informed your later decisions in life or your personality later on?
It's one of the things about the Marine Corps is it's like any military, it's all hierarchical. And that doesn't work in business anymore. You can't just rule with an iron fist and demand things. So that was a detriment in my transition from military to civilian life, is I had to unlearn that, and thankfully I had Ruth, and made that easy. But the military taught me a lot of things. It obviously instilled discipline, both external and internal. It taught me a sense of mission. To complete that mission is something beyond yourself. It also, for those of us who've been in combat, we don't need to explain it. For those who haven't, no explanation is possible. I can't possibly convey to somebody who's not been there what it is. And it's a life-changing experience. I like to hire veterans. I like to hire people who've seen the elephant, so I don't have to explain it to them. I think the things that we learn in the military in terms of discipline, in terms of mission, in terms of leadership, translate very well to civilian life. There's other aspects that don't. So, yeah, military was very good for me and taught me a lot of things. I grew up. I was 17 when I joined. I was 21 when I got out. 4 years in the Marine Corps. You grow up.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. You mentioned something interesting there as well, which is this idea of, I guess there's putting the mission first, but there's also the change in leadership styles. So I heard this idea of three leadership styles. One is authority-based leadership, which is what you mentioned, hierarchical, barking orders. It's the very traditional style of boss and then underling. And then there's the coaching style of leadership, which is more so like one-on-one. I try to help, my employees grow. And if they make a mistake, I help them improve from it. I'm not as authority driven, more so empowerment driven. And then the third style is this gardening style of leadership, where it's more like you view your company as a garden, and all you're trying to do is lay down the sort of the seeds, the fertilizer, the soil, the water, and just keep an environment where good plants can grow. And of course, you have to identify and remove the weeds, which are the people who are ruining the company. So which style of leadership do you think you most align with of those three?
Well, nowadays it's cultivation. I hire good people. I don't hire jerks. And I allow them to grow. And one of the things I learned, and it took me quite a while, is style is nowhere near as important as results. And I had to get over the idea that it has to be done my way because I'm the boss. And I think that's the best way to do it. And it may be the best way for me to do it. It may not be the best way for someone else to do it with their particular skill set, education, intellect, predilections, whatever. There may be other ways to get to the same result as efficiently, but a different style. And that's okay. As long as the mission is fulfilled, I have less of a problem now. I may look at it in askance and go, but if it works, I'm not going to gainsay them. The fact that their style accomplishes the mission. Oh, that was a big learning experience for me. So cultivation of of giving them a place where they can grow and prosper and the tools to be able to do so. And sometimes the motivation, you got to apply the sunshine and the water and the fertilizer, but, don't treat them like mushrooms. So keep them in the dark and feed them BS.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the garden is a much more friendly environment. Military is authoritarian. It has to be, because at times you've got to tell somebody to go out and die. Yeah. So, but that's not civilian life.
Right. Yeah.
Hopefully.
There's something I love from Simon Sinek. He mentions this idea that, people who get really good at their job, like say a really good accountant or a really good programmer, they might get promoted to then manage other accountants or other programmers. And so when they're managing these people, they are actually really good at the job that this person they're managing is doing. So it might be tempting for them to step in and do it for them, or like you said, to dictate style. But something that nobody teaches them is that they are no longer responsible for the work itself. They are now responsible for the person who's responsible for the work. And so it's their job to help that person figure it out themselves and help them grow, not to just step in and do it for them. So it sounds like you've learned that lesson as well.
I have, and that is truly management. American business management, for the most part, sucks. Okay, people aren't good at it. It's something I've studied and worked at and tried to get better at for many, many years. I've been a critic of American business management my entire life, because I see its failures on a constant basis. And it comes down to people, and that's management. You're managing people. And you've got to, first of all, you hire good people, you train them well, you let them use their style where you can, because that's what they're comfortable with. And barking orders and screaming at them and micromanagement and so on doesn't work. It's never worked. So why people insist on doing it is because they don't understand the role of what a manager is. It's not to do the work. It's to manage the people that will do the work, and that's a hard thing to learn. Some people never do, and should never be in management positions. It kind of goes back to the Peter Principle. Peter Lawrence, many years ago, people get promoted to a point where they are incompetent at their job and no longer get promoted, but they stay in that job, and that's a mistake of their management. If you promoted somebody to a place where they're not capable of doing the job, you need to move them back to a place they are capable, and they'll be happier. They know they're incompetent at a job, or they should. And if they're not doing their job, then they're not being productive as they could be for you. And you're wasting time and money and irritating other people by having an incompetent in the job. That Peter Principle is a lack of senior management, pure and simple.
Yeah, and I think it's a fear to demote people for some reason, or to even admit that you were wrong to promote them in the first place, right? Or that it just didn't work out. And I think, go ahead.
Admitting you're wrong is a huge thing, and a lot of people are incapable, let alone unwilling, to do that. So if you promote somebody and they're incompetent at that job, you've made a mistake. And a lot of management won't admit a mistake. Never. They don't make mistakes, but yet they do.
Yeah, I think that sense of humility is very important, because if you can't admit you've made a mistake, you're not really going to learn or grow at all, right? Like, mistakes are just how we learn, identifying mistakes and fixing them. So how do you train your leaders or managers at Get Payroll?
I give them responsibility and authority, and then guide them. And when they make mistakes, we sit down and discuss it so they understand what the mistake was. Because I'm actually training my replacements right now to take over the company. I'll turn 75 this year. I'm not going to live forever. It would be nice, but none of us are getting out of this alive. So I'm working on that right now and providing them more tasks, more responsibilities, more authority. And they're learning more and more and more of the business. My ops manager is working on his EA right now, his enrolled agent status. so he can handle some of the technical things that requires that certification. I don't expect him to become a CPA, but he will become an enrolled agent probably later this year, which will then allow him to execute limited power of attorneys with the Internal Revenue Service for our clients, as I do now. So, yeah, we're bringing them along.
Makes sense. So for the last few minutes of the podcast, I just want to sort of bring a hypothetical to the table. So does Get Payroll only serve businesses in the US?
Yes.
Okay, makes sense because US tax code and all that. So one thing I've been thinking about long term is like I really want to be in Austin, Texas, because that's where all the podcasters are. Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, Chris Williamson. So let's say it's 5 years from now and I move my podcast to Austin, Texas. I start a small business. Maybe I've employed 2 or 3 people. What would the process be like for me to get payroll and get it up and running? And why would I choose Get Payroll over the competitors? You can think of this as like an ad for your company.
Sure. Well, it's relatively simple. You'll call up and speak to my business development manager. Call me, and I'll put him over to him. He'll walk through what's involved, what you're doing, how many people you have, how often you pay, some of the complexities, what you're looking for, whether you need timekeeping, HR, workers' comp, other things, the panoply of things that we offer. And having gone through that, he'll provide you a quote. And if you agree, then he'll send out a file invite with the various data we need. And about 5 days later, you'll be trained on the payroll system, so you can enter the information for the hours worked and the salaries and so on. And we'll be in business.
Nice.
It's literally that simple. Why you would choose us? Our unique selling proposition is compliance. And understand, all of our competitors, for the most part, do a reasonably good job of producing paychecks, or they'd be out of business, and we'd be the only payroll company. So, they don't do bad work in that. But what they do lack is compliance expertise. If you need a CPA, most payroll companies will tell you to call your CPA. For a tax question, for a technical question on taxes and other things that are involved in that, because they don't want to take on the liability for offering professional advice. Beyond that, if you have a problem with the IRS, they can't advocate for you to the IRS. They can send the IRS reports, but they can't call up a auditor, they can't call up a revenue agent and explain what the situation is. I can. I take a limited power of attorney that allows me to advocate for my clients with the IRS up to and including tax court, which is a whole nother bite at the apple. Now, we were kind of referred to as insurance for your payroll. You might not need that, but 40% of small businesses get tagged with a tax penalty every year, which means if you weren't tagged with one last year or the year before, you're due this year. So you're probably going to need us because the IRS makes millions of mistakes every year. 100,000 civil servants dealing with obsolete technology and masses and masses of paper. During COVID, they lost literally millions of returns. And, they got rained on in tractor trailers, and all their mail openers were gone and wouldn't come back to work for bonuses. It was a total disaster. At one point in time, there were 20 million unopened envelopes in the parking lot in Ogden, Utah. So if you think the IRS is this magical agency that does everything perfectly, I got some land in South Florida I'd like to tell you.
Okay, makes sense. So if there are legal troubles or misunderstandings with the IRS, then your team can help me directly. I don't have to go to an accountant. I don't have to split the information and try to explain everything to someone else, which is great. Yeah. So you kind of provide both services, or at least the option for both services.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
With the power of attorney, we get a copy of the letter from the IRS. Sometimes we solve the problem before you've even opened your copy of the letter.
Right. Yeah. So it's all encompassing, no headaches for me. Perfect. Great. Yeah, I can see why
Exactly.
I would. Yeah, it's like a no-brainer to choose Get Payroll over anything else. just because of that. Yeah.
We think so.
Peace of mind. Yeah, peace of mind is priceless, right? So perfect, Charles. It's been great having you on. Have a great rest of your day.
Ramsey, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.